it's a swimming spot. We
Right.
don't have no swimming spots anymore.
So unfortunately, you have to intervene, you have to kind of get in the process to make sure that those considerations happen, because they are, despite the fact they're all in one giant building,
Yeah.
they are very siloed. And to some degree, you know, they're bureaucrats. It's hard work to think about all that stuff. It's really easy to think about your stuff. You know, so that advocacy makes a big difference. And knowing the questions to ask and knowing who the right people are to talk to and how to get those people engaged in the process is a big part of this kind of stuff.
And when an elected official calls the Region 3 director, you will get attention.
Yes.
You really will.
They usually call us.
But to the extent that you want.
No, I think we're good now. But they were willing to move in too,
Yeah, gotcha. Gotcha.
for that travel time, we could be there instantly. But yeah, we've come a long way over the past 2.5 years with the news, that there's actually communication.
At the end of the day, you know, those guys, they're people, they just want to do their job.
Yeah.
And so some of it is about figuring out how do you find a common ground, let them do their job and be happy, and you got what you want. They regulate you, fighting them, they still need to say yes at some point. You know?
Typically, they're good partners to us.
They are, it's a lot of it's about the approach.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we should say is that we actually talked about an enormous range of things. You know, what we often do with the community that we're new to, because we're new, is, you know, say to you, well, what's your priority list? What things are important to you? We don't do everything, you know, but what's the thing that's the most important to you? And then, you know, and then what are the other things that you want to see happen? And then how do we create priorities and focus our efforts? You know, the scattershot approach to stuff generally doesn't work. You don't all have enough resources to make that kind of stuff fly. So while we do a lot of things, usually the most effective thing to do is say, what's the thing that is the most important to you right now? Be it sort of more on the planning side, is it like in terms of what's the rate impact and how we're gonna pay for stuff? And then stuff we have today and stuff we're gonna have in the future versus, yeah, but we have this water line that, you know, is more color than pipe that needs to be replaced. And what do we do about that? You know, so that kind of come up with that priority list and then, you know, tackle those things in a very focused way.
We should have a vision list, there should be 5 things on it. You know, we should all know that. And then we may come across something that goes, whoa, hold on, wait a minute, we got something for you for number 3. Even though number 1's a priority,
Yeah.
we got 5 on the list. Hey, we got something here, so let's go.
One of the conversations that we had, that we're spending all this money at the wastewater plant, but pump stations are. So it doesn't matter how much we spend over there, we can't get it there.
Yeah, you really get there.
And that was, so little by little, I think
We've
we
been doing, minor upgrades slowly, or come emergency time.
Yeah.
We're trying to get in front of it, I think we kind of are in front of it now, we have a pretty good plan, but it's only as far as an operator can go,
Right.
with that reach.
And that's where, you know, that's probably one of our first things that we would look into. I mean, there's so many number ones.
Right, for sure, the rates,
For sure.
as you mentioned, that's
How-
important.
Yeah, and that conversation was started with us, but I think we hit a wall.
Yeah.
Or we really didn't, you know.
You know, maybe look at.
I mean, I know what we need to pay back the bond.
Right.
How do we get there?
Right, in a lot of communities, what happens is this is what triggers you, so you have a major capital improvement, you're gonna have this bonded debt. So this is what triggers looking at, well, who are we charging? And how are we charging them? And when do we get the revenue? And does that match up with when we need the revenue? And, you know, all of these kinds of questions, so, you know, is it equitable? Is little Mrs. Jones, who lives all by her little self, in her little house, paying the same thing as, you know, the SIPCO that makes a ton of money off the provision of public services? You know, so those kinds of questions come up, and it's a good time to be thinking about how do we fairly and equitably distribute the costs of these things not just with a today in mind, but with also a future in mind. So paying back the wastewater bond, one thing, if my friend over here comes back and says, oh, and by the way, here's the long list of things that need to be done in the water system, there's the same person paying that back. So having a mind towards how those pieces all fit together. And how do you make sure that that burden is reasonable? Nobody wants to pay more money, we get it. But the costs are what they are. And unless we find a way to get outside revenue into the system, which maybe there is an opportunity to do that, making sure that you kind of go into it eyes wide open and saying, okay, this is my cost burden. How do I most fairly and equitably distribute that cost burden? It's not taxes. Taxes based on assessed value. It is what it is. When you water and your sewer, you have a lot more flexibility about how you choose to charge people as long as you charge them commensurate with their benefit.
You could also do commercial versus residential.
You can. And you can do residential in categories. You can do little Mrs. Smith who lives all by herself versus this nice man who has 5 children. You know, there are a lot of different ways. There's no, I'm always for simple, straightforward, if we all get hit by a bus tomorrow, someone can pick it up and make sure it works. But on the other hand, it still also needs to be fair. So sometimes you need to get a little more in the weeds. You need to look at, my perspective is, you at your house using water as a public benefit, right? You're not making money on the deal, right? It's just your house. If you sell your house tomorrow, if you didn't have public water and sewer, it's probably worth less. But just if everybody has public water and sewer, that's the equalizing factor. On the other hand, if I run a pizza shop, I make a profit on the provision of public services, right? I'm using that water and I make a profit. Now I wouldn't want to put the pizza guy out of business. On the other hand, it's legitimate to say he benefits more, she benefits more from that provision of public service. So we do a lot of that kind of rate modeling to say, okay, well, because every customer base is different. If we go to the Village of Monroe, their customer base is different than your customer base. There's no one-size-fits-all method for charging people. So we try to say what's fair and equitable. 99% of your customers are residential. Maybe it's legitimate to charge everybody exactly the same thing. But if you have a split and maybe 60% are residential and 40% are commercial, let's look at that commercial customer base and say what's fair and equitable based on this provision of public service. These commercial entities couldn't be here without you. They're here because you have these public services that people a long time ago and today pay taxes for.
It's like the coffee shop, like Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. We
Right.
charge them sewer based on the water, but they're not gonna get anything on the sewer this weekend. They take that cup of coffee out.
Yeah.
This is a sheet, I just found this in my book, this is from the town of Wyndham. We started a water project in 2007, we're just finishing it now. But in 2007, the project started out as 2.2 million. We wound up at 10 million after 12 years.
Well, that's a selling point.
But we connected all these new properties, and anyway, when we started out, the board said, our folks pay $381 a year. When we're done, we're not gonna violate the $600 a year, right? But we're gonna put in an arsenic treatment system, a sulfur treatment system, we're gonna replace all of our mains, and we're gonna connect our 2 hamlets and always build redundancy. We're gonna, by building redundancy in your water system, we took out our highest, when you have 2 wells, you have 3 wells, and you say DOH or your water supply permit, and the way they look at that is they say you take your highest producing well out of service, you add up the other 2, okay? So if you had 100, 100, and 200, you don't have 400, you only have 200, but you get the 100, 100. The 200 stays there as a level of conservatism. I said that word, so I revoked. So I was worried about it, this was coming out. Anyway.
Just love your tongue.
So the board had said back in 2007, we're not going to violate 600. We started at 381. We went from 2.2 million to 9.2 million, and we brought the rate down to 560, 545, 560,
We
something
spent more
like that.
money,
We spent
kept the rates
lower than what the
we
board
predicted.
wanted to go to, because we reached out and connected all these other parcels
Added more
and brought them
customers.
on. And we got more grant money, and then we took some of their existing debt that they had with USDA, we rolled it over to
Consolidated the debt and
0%
reduced the interest
EFC,
rate,
blah, blah,
which is a
blah.
huge
But
impact.
holy smokes, this was a long time, the guy, our reporter, he's just tired of writing about it, he goes, "No, I can't write about it anymore. It's just
12 years,
you
right?
know,
12
yeah,
years, so there's one year left.
And 2008 was a hit. You know, we had all these plans, and 2008 happened. So that's what Mary Beth's talking about, is putting together that plan for finance, looking at what your goals are, and then, you know, and then rolling with it, trying to create revenue to balance out what you're amortizing and all that kind of stuff. But we also started with, we knew exactly where we were. We GIS'd the entire community. We looked at the pipe went in front of every house. Does that house pay debt? Or do they at least pay debt? Or do they pay debt and for water? They need to pay at least debt. We had 35 homes that didn't pay debt. We just forgot. We as a community forgot. Over the years, that just happened. There were other people who were connected who weren't paying water bills. There were all these kind of things. But you add all that up, really get into the weeds, and then you build a program that works.
It is not
Pretty-
uncommon that the
pretty neat.
solution to reducing the cost is to increase the capital cost of the project.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre, but if, sometimes it's you're trying to find, like water tanks are the classic story. There's no money to build a water tank, right? Nobody pays for water tanks. There's no federal program, there's no grant program, whatever. But if we attach that water tank to another project that maybe is treating for microbiological contaminants, magically the water tank is fundable under the same program
Yeah.
as those microbiological contaminants. So sometimes it's counterintuitive. You're building, you know, one of the things John was saying, like if you have 5 priorities and maybe number 3 on the list is where all the money is today, maybe number 3 may be the one you do, because that's where all the money is.
And then try
That's
to
the sexy
drag
project
in
today.
2.
Drag in number 2 with it if you can. This is, I'll leave you guys with this. This is a study we did for the Village of Monroe. Unfortunately, when I printed it, and I didn't realize this, but the end, these are supposed to be 11 by 17 sheets. So you'll need a microscope to see that. Because they printed on 8.5 by 11, but this was a couple things. Monroe had allowed their water revenues to get in the red, like quite a lot. And they were subsidizing their water system with tax dollars, which of course, you know. So they, the Office State Comptroller came and said, bad village, fix this. So they did a surcharge, they figured out the math, how much money did they need to pay back, they divided by the number of customers, and everybody paid like I think it was $19 and some cents a year for 5 years, pay back and to get them back to the black line. But then at the same time, they realized, so now, you know, kind of we're back to baseline, but we have a huge, huge investment to make, about $4 million in the water plant, in their wells, in lines, in water tanks, all these different things. So now they just got back to black, and they're saying, okay, you know, how are we gonna do this? So we created this water master plan, which did a couple of things. One thing was it went through and said, here's the status of your system today. Here's your list of needs. Here's the cost of your list of needs. Here's how all of those things match up in the world to either people to pay for them or grant sources or just, you just gotta pay for this because it is the cost of doing business or whatever. And then in addition to that, because $4 million is a pretty big number, what does that look like in terms of rate impact? And this was where we realized that they were charging everybody exactly the same. They were charging the hotel the same thing that they were charging Mrs. Smith in her house. And we were like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So we looked at 3 different rate structures, and they're in here, and you can see kind of how we did the math. It was born of who's your customer base. It wasn't imposed from on high, it was who are the people that you have to share the costs with, and what's a reasonable way to charge them. At the end of the day, we raised the revenue, we paid for O&M, raised the revenue, we paid the $4 million bond back, and you'll see that residential customers end up paying like $23 less a year. Commercial customers end up paying like $150 more a year. And the bulk customers, I can't remember what that happened, but nobody noticed. The changes were so small, the shift in changes, just because of the balance in the system, were so small that we held a public hearing, it was crickets, nobody showed up, we took a $4 million bond, nobody noticed. But that was all because, now if we had left the rates the way they were, we would have pitchforks and torches. People would have been losing their minds because the rates would have gone way up. But instead, it was a balancing process. So what they did here to take this out of the political realm, they adopted this as policy. They basically said, we now have a policy about how we deal with our infrastructure. So we're not gonna debate whether or not we should give him the money to fix the pump. We're all just gonna agree that the pump should be fixed, because it's been identified as a cost that's legitimate in the system. And we're not gonna, that's not gonna be a discussion anymore. We're simply gonna say, give us a legitimate list, the engineer review it to make sure that it's a legitimate list of the needs of the system, and it goes in the policy. So it makes budgeting easier. No longer is it somebody showing up and saying, I don't want to pay $10 more. You know, so that was the value in doing this. This document's from 2013 and they're still using it. We gave them all of the data so that they can, on a live basis, plug in the new information and see the cost impact over time. It projects it out for, I think this one's 20-year projection. It projects their costs over 20 years.